In 1955, a mother in Ohio never threw away a single chicken bone and vegetable peel jar because wasting food was a sin and wasting anything useful was foolish. She saved chicken bones in the freezer until she had enough to make stock. She kept vegetable peels in a bowl and turned them into soup. Coffee grounds went to the garden. Stale bread became breadcrumbs. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was thrown away. Today we toss these scraps in the garbage without thinking. Let's count down 30 kitchen scraps clever 1950s moms never threw away and why. Chicken bones became the most saved kitchen scrap in the 1950s because mothers knew that bones meant free homemade stock. After Sunday chicken dinner, every bone went into a glass jar or coffee can stored in the freezer. When the container filled up, usually after 3 or 4 chickens, the bones dumped into a large pot with water, onion peels, carrot tops, celery leaves, and a bay leaf, and simmered for 3 hours. The bones released collagen, minerals, and flavor into the water and turned it into rich, golden chicken stock. That stock became the base for chicken noodle soup, vegetable soup, gravy, and casseroles throughout the week. Store-bought chicken broth cost money families didn't have. Homemade stock was free. Mothers who threw away chicken bones were considered wasteful and careless. Kids learned early to pile bones on the side of their plates instead of scraping them into the garbage. Today, we toss chicken bones in the trash without thinking. Back then, throwing away bones meant throwing away a week's worth of meals. Vegetable peels and scraps never hit the garbage in the 1950s because mothers saved every carrot peel, potato skin, onion end, celery leaf, and wilted lettuce leaf in a bowl in the icebox and turned them into soup stock once a week. The scraps simmered in a pot with water, salt, and a bay leaf for 2 hours until the water turned golden and flavorful. The soggy scraps strained out and composted or fed to chickens, and the stock saved for soup, gravy, or cooking rice and beans. Store-bought vegetable broth didn't exist yet. Homemade stock was the only option, and it was free. Mothers who threw away vegetable peels were considered lazy and wasteful. Kids learned to peel carrots and potatoes over a bowl instead of over the sink, so the scraps could be saved. Today, we toss peels into the garbage disposal without thinking. Back then, vegetable scraps were liquid gold that stretched the grocery budget and kept families fed when money ran out before payday. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email, too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Stale bread never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers turned it into breadcrumbs, stuffing, bread pudding, French toast, or croutons, depending on how stale it was and what the family needed that week. Slightly stale bread became French toast for breakfast, dunked in beaten eggs and milk, and fried in butter until golden. Very stale bread got torn into pieces and baked into bread pudding with milk, eggs, sugar, and raisins. Rock-hard bread got grated into breadcrumbs and stored in a jar for coating chicken, topping casseroles, or stretching meatloaf. Bread crusts that kids refused to eat got cubed and toasted into croutons for salad or soup. Nothing was wasted. Throwing away bread was considered sinful because bread was sacred and people in other countries were starving. Kids who left crusts on their plates got lectured about starving children and told to clean their plates. Today, we toss stale bread in the garbage. Back then, stale bread was an ingredient, not waste. Before we move. Coffee grounds never went in the garbage in the 1950s because mothers saved them for the garden. Used coffee grounds dumped into the compost pile or scattered directly around roses, tomatoes, and azaleas because the grounds added nitrogen to the soil and helped plants grow strong and healthy. Some mothers mixed coffee grounds with eggshells and buried the mixture at the base of vegetable plants to fertilize them naturally without buying expensive fertilizer from the store. Coffee grounds also repelled slugs, snails, and ants, so mothers sprinkled them around doorways and window sills to keep pests out of the house. Throwing away coffee grounds was wasteful when they could feed the garden and save money on fertilizer and pest control. Kids learned early to dump coffee grounds into the compost bucket instead of the garbage. Today, we toss grounds in the trash. Back then, coffee grounds were garden gold that turned kitchen waste into homegrown tomatoes, roses, and vegetables that fed the family all summer long. Eggshells never hit the garbage in the 1950s because mothers crushed them and used them for the garden or as scouring powder for cleaning pots and pans. Rinsed eggshells dried on the windowsill for a day, then crushed with a rolling pin and added to the compost pile or scattered around tomato plants and pepper plants because the calcium in the shells prevented blossom end rot and helped plants grow strong. Some mothers baked eggshells in a low oven until brittle, then ground them into fine powder and sprinkled the powder on cast-iron skillets and pots to scrub away stuck-on food without scratching the surface. Eggshells also deterred slugs and snails in the garden because the sharp edges cut their soft bodies. Throwing away eggshells was wasteful when they could fertilize plants, clean pots, and protect gardens from pests. Kids learned to rinse eggshells and save them in a bowl on the counter. Today, we toss shells in the trash. Back then, eggshells were free fertilizer and cleaning powder rolled into one. 5 scraps down. Everyone saved and reused by clever 1950s mothers. Chicken bones became stock. Vegetable peels became broth. Stale bread became breadcrumbs. Coffee grounds fed the garden. Eggshells fertilized tomatoes. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was thrown away. Today, we toss these scraps without thinking. Back then, wasting food was a sin. Beef bones never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers saved them for bone broth that healed sick children and stretched the meat budget. After pot roast or steak dinner, every beef bone went into a jar in the freezer alongside chicken bones. When the jar filled up, pour the bones roasted in a hot oven until browned and caramelized, then transferred to a large pot with water, onion, carrot, celery, vinegar, salt, and pepper, and simmered for 12 to 24 hours. The long simmer pulled collagen, minerals, and marrow from the bones and turned the water into thick, gelatinous bone broth that jiggled when cold. That broth became the base for beef vegetable soup, gravy, and cooking grains. Bone broth also cured colds, soothed upset stomachs, and helped broken bones heal faster because of the collagen and calcium. Mothers who threw away beef bones were considered foolish. Today, we toss bones in the trash. Back then, beef bones were medicine and food rolled into one. Chicken fat and drippings never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers saved them in a jar in the icebox and used them for cooking instead of buying butter or oil. After roasting a chicken, the drippings and rendered fat poured into a glass jar or coffee can and stored in the refrigerator until needed. The fat solidified on top and could be scooped out with a spoon and used to fry potatoes, cook eggs, sauté vegetables, or grease baking pans. The flavorful drippings underneath got stirred into gravy, soup, or rice for extra richness. Chicken fat was free and tasted better than store-bought shortening. Mothers who poured drippings down the drain were considered wasteful. Jewish grandmothers saved chicken fat and called it schmaltz, on spreading it on bread like butter or using it to make matzo balls and chopped liver. Today we pour drippings down the drain. Back then, chicken fat was cooking gold that replaced expensive butter and added flavor to every meal. Beef fat and drippings never went in the garbage in the 1950s because mothers rendered the fat into tallow and used it for frying, baking, and even making soap. After cooking a roast or ground beef, the fat poured into a jar or coffee can and stored in the refrigerator. Solid white beef fat got rendered slowly in a pot on the stove until it melted into clear liquid tallow. The liquid strained through cheesecloth into jars and stored for months without refrigeration. Tallow was used for frying chicken, making pie crusts flaky and tender, greasing cast-iron pans, and even making homemade soap when mixed with lye. Beef tallow was shelf-stable, free, and healthier than processed vegetable oils that didn't exist yet. Mothers who threw away beef fat were considered ignorant of kitchen basics. Today, we pour fat down the drain or toss it in the trash. Back then, beef fat was a cooking staple that replaced expensive butter and lasted all year without spoiling. Glass jars never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers washed them, saved them, and reused them for storing leftovers, canning vegetables, holding pantry staples, and organizing small items. Every jelly jar, pickle jar, mayonnaise jar, and jam jar got rinsed out and stacked in the cupboard. Jars with lids became leftover containers for soup, gravy, and cooked vegetables stored in the icebox. Wide-mouth jars became canning jars for tomatoes, green beans, peaches, and pickles during harvest season. Small jars held buttons, rubber bands, nails, screws, and sewing supplies. Large jars held flour, sugar, rice, and beans in the pantry. Buying storage containers was wasteful when jars were free and worked just as well. Mothers who threw away glass jars were considered foolish. Kids learned to rinse jars and save them under the sink. Today we recycle jars or toss them. Back then, glass jars were free storage containers that lasted forever and never needed replacing. Potato peels never hit the garbage in the 1950s because mothers fried them into crispy snacks, composted them for the garden, or fed them to chickens and pigs. After peeling potatoes for mashed potatoes or potato salad, the peels rinsed and patted dry, then tossed in a hot skillet with a little oil or chicken fat and fried until golden and crispy. The fried peels sprinkled with salt and eaten as a snack while dinner cooked. Kids fought over the crispy peels and crunched them like chips. If the peels weren't fried, they went into the compost bucket or fed to backyard chickens who pecked them clean and turned them into eggs. Some farm families fed potato peels to pigs who ate them eagerly and grew fat. Throwing away potato peels was wasteful when they could be eaten, composted, or fed to animals. Today we toss peels into the garbage disposal. Back then, potato peels were food, fertilizer, and animal feed rolled into one. 10 scraps down. Everyone saved and reused by clever 1950s mothers. Beef bones became broth. Chicken fat replaced butter. Beef fat turned into tallow. Glass jars became storage containers. Potato peels became snacks. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was thrown away. Today, we toss these scraps without thinking. Back then, wasting anything useful was foolish. Leftover mashed potatoes never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers turned them into potato pancakes, soup, casserole toppings, or bread, depending on how much was left and what the family needed that week. A cup or two of cold mashed potatoes mixed with a beaten egg, a handful of flour, salt, and pepper, shaped into patties and fried in a hot skillet with a little oil until golden and crispy on both sides. The potato pancakes served for breakfast with eggs or for dinner as a side dish. If there were several cups of mashed potatoes left, mothers stirred them into potato soup with milk, butter, diced onion, and celery. Leftover mashed potatoes also got spread on top of shepherd's pie or cottage pie as the crust, then baked until golden and bubbly. Some mothers mixed mashed potatoes into bread dough to make potato bread that stayed moist for days. Throwing away mashed potatoes was wasteful when they could be transformed into 3 different meals. Kids who complained about eating leftovers got lectured about starving children and told to clean their plates without argument. Mothers who threw away food were gossiped about by neighbors who viewed waste as a character flaw and a sign of poor household management. Today, we scrape leftover mashed potatoes into the garbage or feed them to the dog. Back then, leftover mashed potatoes were the start of tomorrow's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And wasting them meant wasting money the family didn't have to spare. Stale cake and cookie crumbs never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers saved them in a jar and used them for trifle, pie crust, icebox cake, or dessert toppings. Stale cake cut into cubes and layered in a glass bowl with custard, whipped cream, and canned fruit became trifle that looked fancy and tasted delicious. Stale cookies crushed with a rolling pin and mixed with melted butter became a no-bake pie crust for cream pies and cheesecakes. Cake crumbs and cookie crumbs mixed together and layered with whipped cream in a loaf pan, then frozen overnight, became icebox cake that sliced beautifully and impressed guests. Crumbs also got sprinkled on top of ice cream, pudding, or fruit salad as a crunchy topping. Throwing away stale cake and cookies was wasteful when they could be transformed into new desserts that cost nothing extra. Mothers kept a jar on the counter labeled crumbs and added every broken cookie, cake scrap, and leftover brownie edge throughout the week. When the jar filled up, a new dessert appeared on the Sunday dinner table, and no one knew it started as scraps. Kids who broke cookies got scolded, but the crumbs still went into the jar. Today we toss stale cake and cookies. Back then, crumbs were dessert ingredients waiting to be transformed into something beautiful and delicious. Bread crusts never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers turned them into croutons, breadcrumbs, or French toast, depending on how stale they were and what the family needed. Fresh bread crusts that kids refused to eat got cubed, tossed in melted butter, sprinkled with garlic powder and salt, and baked in a low oven until golden and crunchy. The homemade croutons topped salads and soups and tasted better than store-bought croutons that cost money. Slightly stale crusts got torn into pieces and dunked in beaten eggs and milk, then fried in butter until golden. French toast made from scraps that kids ate without complaint because syrup covered the taste. Very stale crusts got grated into breadcrumbs and stored in a jar for coating fried chicken, topping casseroles, or mixing into meatloaf to stretch the meat. Some mothers fed bread crusts to backyard chickens who pecked them clean and turned them into eggs. Throwing away bread crusts was wasteful when they could feed the family or the chickens. Kids who left crusts on their plates got lectured about waste and told to eat every bite or go to bed hungry. Mothers who threw away crusts were judged by neighbors as lazy and careless. Today we cut crusts off sandwiches and toss them. Back then, bread crusts were ingredients, chicken feed, and a test of character all rolled into one. Sour milk never got poured down the drain in the 1950s because mothers used it for baking biscuits, pancakes, cornbread, and cakes. When fresh milk turned sour before the family finished drinking it, the sour milk got saved in the icebox and used within a day or two. Sour milk mixed with flour, baking powder, salt, and a little butter made fluffy biscuits that rose high and tasted tangy and delicious. Sour milk replaced buttermilk in pancake batter and made the pancakes light and tender. Sour milk stirred into cornbread batter added moisture and tang. Sour milk mixed into chocolate cake batter reacted with baking soda and made the cake rise tall and stay moist for days. The acidity in sour milk activated the baking soda and created a chemical reaction that made baked goods rise without adding expensive baking powder. Pouring sour milk down the drain was wasteful when it could be used for baking. Mothers who wasted milk were considered careless and foolish because milk cost money and came from the milkman who delivered it in glass bottles that had to be returned. Kids learned early that sour milk smelled bad but tasted fine when baked into biscuits or pancakes. Today, we pour sour milk down the drain and buy fresh milk. Back then, sour milk was a baking ingredient that saved money and prevented waste. Carrot tops and celery leaves never hit the garbage in the 1950s because mothers saved them for soup stock, chicken feed, or compost. After peeling carrots or chopping celery for salad or soup, the leafy tops and tender leaves went into a bowl in the icebox alongside other vegetable scraps. When the bowl filled up, the scraps simmered in a pot with water, onion peels, salt, and a bay leaf for 2 hours to make vegetable stock. The celery leaves added a strong, savory flavor to the stock. The carrot tops added a slightly bitter, earthy taste that balanced the sweetness of other vegetables. After straining, the soggy tops and leaves went to the compost pile or fed to backyard chickens who pecked them clean. Some mothers chopped fresh carrot tops and celery leaves finely and stirred them into salads, soups, or casseroles as a free herb that added flavor without buying expensive parsley or dill. Throwing away carrot tops and celery leaves was wasteful when they could flavor stock, feed chickens, or act as free herbs. Kids learned to save tops and leaves instead of tossing them. Today, we throw away tops and leaves without thinking. Back then, every part of the vegetable got used because wasting food was a sin. 15 scraps down, everyone saved and reused by clever 1950s mothers. Leftover potatoes became pancakes, cake crumbs became trifle, bread crusts became croutons, sour milk became biscuits, carrot tops became stock. Nothing was wasted, nothing was thrown away. Today we toss these scraps. Back then, wasting food meant wasting money. Onion skins never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers saved them for soup stock or for dyeing fabric and Easter eggs. The papery outer skins of yellow onions and red onions peeled off and saved in a bowl alongside vegetable scraps. When the bowl filled up, the skins simmered in a pot with water, carrot peels, celery leaves, and a bay leaf for 2 hours to make deeply flavored vegetable stock. The onion skins added a rich golden color and a slightly sweet caramelized flavor that made the stock taste like it had been simmered for days. After straining, the soggy skins went to the compost pile. Some mothers saved onion skins specifically for dyeing fabric, yarn, or Easter eggs. A big pot of onion skins boiled with water created a natural golden yellow or rusty orange dye, depending on how many skins were used and how long they boiled. White fabric dipped into the onion skin dye turned soft yellow. Eggs boiled with onion skins turned beautiful shades of brown and orange without using store-bought dye. Throwing away onion skins was wasteful when they could flavor stock or dye fabric for free. Kids learned to peel onions over a bowl to catch the skins. Mothers who threw away onion skins were viewed as careless. Today, we toss onion skins into the garbage without thinking. Back then, onion skins were stock flavoring and natural dye rolled into one. Leftover rice never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers turned it into fried rice, rice pudding, rice soup, or casserole fillers, depending on how much was left and what the family needed. Cold leftover rice fried in a hot skillet with a little oil, diced vegetables, scrambled eggs, and soy sauce became fried rice that tasted better than the original plain rice. Leftover rice simmered with milk, sugar, cinnamon, and raisins became rice pudding served warm or cold as dessert. Leftover rice stirred into vegetable soup or chicken soup made the soup thicker and more filling. Leftover rice mixed into casseroles stretched the meat and made the dish feed more people. Some mothers shaped cold rice into patties, fried them until crispy, and served them for breakfast with syrup. Throwing away leftover rice was wasteful when it could be transformed into 4 different meals. Mothers who cooked too much rice and couldn't use the leftovers were viewed as poor planners. Kids who complained about eating fried rice got lectured about starving children in China and told to clean their plates. Today, we scrape leftover rice into the garbage or feed it to the dog. Back then, leftover rice was the start of tomorrow's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and wasting rice meant wasting the time it took to cook it and the money it cost to buy it. Turkey carcass never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers boiled it for soup stock that lasted a week and fed the family through Thanksgiving leftovers. After carving the Thanksgiving or Christmas turkey, the picked clean carcass with leftover bits of meat clinging to the bones went into the largest pot in the kitchen with water, onion, celery, carrots, bay leaves, salt, and pepper. The pot simmered on the back of the stove for 3 to 4 hours until the bones fell apart and the broth turned golden and rich. The bones and soggy vegetables strained out. The leftover turkey meat picked off the bones and returned to the broth, and the stock became turkey soup, turkey noodle soup, turkey vegetable soup, or turkey rice soup throughout the week. Turkey stock also got frozen in jars and saved for making gravy at Christmas or Easter. Throwing away a turkey carcass was wasteful and foolish when it could make a week's worth of soup. Mothers who threw away the carcass were judged harshly by neighbors who knew better. Kids learned early to strip every bit of meat off the bones before the carcass went into the pot. Today we throw turkey carcasses in the garbage. Back then, turkey carcasses were liquid gold that stretched the holiday meal into a week of free dinners. Wilted vegetables never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers cooked them into soup, stew, or casseroles before they spoiled completely. Lettuce that wilted in the icebox got torn up and added to vegetable soup where it cooked down and disappeared. Carrots that turned rubbery got diced and added to stew or pot roast where they softened and tasted fine. Celery that went limp got chopped and added to casseroles, stuffing, or soup stock. Tomatoes that turned soft got peeled and cooked into tomato sauce or added to chili. Peppers that wrinkled got diced and stirred into scrambled eggs or fried rice. Throwing away wilted vegetables was wasteful when they could still be cooked and eaten. Mothers who let vegetables spoil completely were viewed as careless and lazy. Kids learned to eat vegetables before they wilted because wilted vegetables tasted worse than fresh vegetables. Some mothers fed wilted vegetables to chickens or pigs if they were too far gone to cook. Today, we toss wilted vegetables into the garbage or compost. Back then, wilted vegetables were soup ingredients waiting to be rescued before they spoiled completely and had to be fed to animals or composted. Coffee cans never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers washed them, saved them, and reused them for storing grease, nails, buttons, screws, coins, and kitchen utensils. Empty metal coffee cans with plastic lids became grease containers stored next to the stove. After frying chicken or cooking ground beef, the hot grease poured into the coffee can and saved for cooking later or thrown away when full. Coffee cans also became storage containers for nails and screws in the garage, buttons and thread in the sewing room, loose change on the dresser, and wooden spoons and spatulas on the kitchen counter. Large coffee cans became planters for herbs or flowers on the windowsill. Small coffee cans became pencil holders or crayon holders for kids. 20 scraps down, everyone saved and reused by clever 1950s mothers. Onion skins became dye, leftover rice became fried rice, turkey carcass became soup, wilted vegetables became stew, coffee cans became storage. Nothing was wasted, nothing was thrown away. Today, we toss these scraps. Back then, waste was shameful. Pickle juice never got poured down the drain in the 1950s because mothers reused it for marinating meat, making new pickles, adding tang to potato salad, or drinking it straight as a remedy for cramps and upset stomachs. After finishing a jar of pickles, the leftover brine saved in the refrigerator and used within a week or two. Chicken breasts or pork chops soaked in pickle juice overnight turned tender and flavorful, then grilled or fried the next day. The acidity in the pickle juice broke down the tough fibers in the meat and made it juicy and delicious. Fresh cucumbers, carrots, or green beans sliced and added to the leftover pickle juice, then stored in the refrigerator for 3 days, became quick refrigerator pickles that tasted almost as good as the original pickles. Pickle juice stirred into potato salad, coleslaw, or deviled eggs added tang and replaced vinegar. Some mothers drank a shot of pickle juice to cure leg cramps, settle upset stomachs, or relieve heartburn because the salt and vinegar in the juice helped rehydrate the body and balance stomach acid. Kids who played outside in the summer heat and came home with cramps got handed a glass of pickle juice and told to drink it fast. Athletes drank pickle juice before games to prevent cramping. Pregnant women sipped pickle juice to ease morning sickness. Throwing away pickle juice was wasteful when it could tenderize meat, make new pickles, flavor salads, and cure common ailments without buying medicine from the drugstore. Mothers who poured pickle juice down the drain were viewed as ignorant of its many uses. Some mothers boiled eggs in pickle juice to make pickled eggs that lasted for weeks in the refrigerator and could be eaten as snacks or sliced into salads. Some mothers added pickle juice to marinades for pot roast or brisket to tenderize tough cuts of meat. Some mothers mixed pickle juice with mayonnaise to make tartar sauce for fried fish. Some mothers froze pickle juice in ice cube trays and added the cubes to Bloody Marys or other cocktails for extra tang. The brine from dill pickles worked better than sweet pickle juice because the dill and garlic flavors enhanced savory dishes without adding unwanted sweetness. Today we pour pickle juice down the drain without thinking and buy expensive meat tenderizers and sports drinks. Back then, pickle juice was meat tenderizer, pickle maker, salad dressing, and medicine all rolled into one glass jar, and pouring it down, the drain was considered wasteful and foolish by women who knew how to stretch every dollar and waste nothing. Watermelon rinds never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers pickled them in vinegar and sugar and turned them into a sweet and sour relish that lasted all winter and tasted like candy. After eating watermelon in the summer, the thick white rinds between the red flesh and the green skin got cut away, peeled, and cubed into 1-inch pieces. The cubed rinds soaked overnight in salted water to draw out bitterness, then drained and rinsed. The rinds simmered in a pot with vinegar, sugar, cinnamon sticks, whole cloves, and lemon slices for 1 hour until the rinds turned translucent and the syrup thickened. The pickled watermelon rinds packed into sterilized jars, sealed tight, and stored in the pantry for months. The sweet pickled rinds served alongside roast chicken, pork chops, or ham as a relish that cut the richness of the meat. Kids ate pickled watermelon rinds straight from the jar as a sweet treat. Some mothers added ginger or allspice to the pickling syrup for extra spice. Some mothers used the rinds in fruit salads or served them with cheese and crackers as an appetizer. Throwing away watermelon rinds was wasteful when they could be transformed into a delicacy that impressed guests and lasted all year. The tradition of pickling watermelon rinds came from Southern grandmothers who grew up during the Great Depression and learned to use every part of every fruit and vegetable because wasting food was a sin and money was scarce. Watermelons grew abundantly in the South during the summer, and families ate watermelon almost every day in July and August. Without pickling the rinds, all that food went to waste. Pickled watermelon rinds also appeared at church potlucks, holiday dinners, and family reunions as a special treat that showed the cook was resourceful and clever. Kids who complained about eating pickled rinds got lectured about starving children and told to appreciate the effort that went into preserving food for the winter. Mothers who threw away watermelon rinds were judged harshly by neighbors who knew better. Today, we throw watermelon rinds into the garbage or compost without thinking. Back then, watermelon rinds were sweet pickled candy that proved a clever mother could turn scraps into something delicious and valuable, and throwing them away meant wasting an opportunity to feed the family something special without spending a dime. Apple peels and cores never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers turned them into apple jelly, apple cider vinegar, or apple scrap tea. After peeling and coring apples for pie, applesauce, or baked apples, the peels and cores went into a pot with water and sugar and simmered for 30 minutes to make apple jelly. The natural pectin in the peels and cores thickened the liquid into jelly without adding store-bought pectin. The cooked scraps strained out through cheesecloth, and the clear liquid boiled with more sugar until it reached the jelly stage, then poured into sterilized jars and sealed. The apple jelly spread on toast, stirred into oatmeal, or used as a glaze for roast chicken. Some mothers let apple peels and cores ferment in a jar with water and sugar for 2 weeks to make homemade apple cider vinegar that could be used for cooking, cleaning, or treating minor ailments. The fermented scraps strained out, and the tangy vinegar stored in bottles for months. Some mothers simmered fresh apple peels with cinnamon sticks and cloves to make apple scrap tea that smelled like autumn and tasted sweet without adding sugar. The tea served hot on cold days or chilled with ice in the summer. Throwing away apple peels and cores was wasteful when they could be turned into jelly, vinegar, or tea for free. Mothers who threw away apple scraps were considered lazy and ignorant of basic kitchen skills. Some mothers fed apple peels and cores to chickens or pigs if there were too many to process. Some mothers composted them if the animals couldn't eat them all. But most mothers found a way to use every peel and core because apples cost money and wasting any part of them was foolish. The tradition of using apple scraps came from European immigrant grandmothers who grew up in countries where food was scarce and wasting anything edible was unthinkable. By the 1950s, saving apple scraps had become a habit passed down from mother to daughter without explanation because everyone just knew that throwing away food was wrong. Kids learned to peel apples over a bowl to catch the scraps. Some families had apple trees in the backyard and processed bushels of apples every fall, turning the fruit into pies, sauce, butter, and jelly, and the scraps into vinegar and animal feed. Today we toss apple peels and cores into the garbage or compost without thinking. Back then, apple scraps were jelly, vinegar, and tea waiting to be made. And throwing them away meant wasting food that could feed the family or preserve the harvest for winter. Beet greens and turnip greens never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers cooked them like spinach and served them as a free vegetable side dish that didn't cost a penny extra. When buying beets or turnips at the market, the leafy green tops came attached and were often fresher and more nutritious than the root vegetables themselves. After cutting off the roots, the greens got rinsed thoroughly to remove dirt and grit, then chopped and cooked in a pot with a little water, salt, and a pat of butter until wilted and tender. Beet greens tasted earthy and slightly sweet. Turnip greens tasted peppery and slightly bitter. Both greens cooked down significantly and turned soft and flavorful after 10 minutes of simmering. Some mothers added diced onion or garlic to the greens for extra flavor. Some mothers cooked the greens with a piece of smoked turkey or chicken for richness. Some mothers stirred vinegar or lemon juice into the cooked greens to cut the bitterness and brighten the flavor. The cooked greens served alongside mashed potatoes, cornbread, or fried chicken, and kids who refused to eat greens got lectured about vitamins and told to clean their plates or go to bed hungry. Some mothers fed beet greens and turnip greens to chickens or rabbits if the family refused to eat them, but most mothers insisted that the greens be eaten because wasting food was a sin and buying extra vegetables cost money the family didn't have. The tradition of eating greens came from Southern, Eastern European, and immigrant families who grew up eating every part of every plant because food was scarce and wasting any edible part was unthinkable. By the 1950s, cooking beet greens and turnip greens had become standard practice in budget-conscious households where mothers knew how to stretch the grocery budget and feed their families without spending extra money. Today we throw away beet greens and turnip greens without thinking, or we buy them separately at farmers' markets and pay premium prices for something that used to come free with the roots. Back then, beet greens and turnip greens were free vegetables that turned one purchase into 2 side dishes, and throwing them away was wasteful and foolish. Corn cobs never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers boiled them to make sweet corn stock for soup or fed them to pigs and chickens. After cutting corn kernels off the cob for creamed corn, corn pudding, or succotash, the stripped cobs went into a pot with water and simmered for 1 hour to make corn stock. The natural sugars and starches in the cobs infused the water and turned it into a sweet, milky stock that tasted like fresh corn. The stock strained and used as the base for corn chowder, vegetable soup, or cooking rice and grits. Corn stock added a subtle sweetness and creaminess to any dish without adding cream or sugar. Some mothers saved corn cobs in the freezer alongside chicken bones and vegetable scraps and added them to stock pots whenever they made broth. Some mothers fed fresh corn cobs to backyard pigs who gnawed them clean and turned them into pork. Some mothers fed dried corn cobs to chickens who pecked at them for days. Some farm families saved dried corn cobs and burned them in the wood stove as kindling because they burned hot and fast and helped start fires without wasting newspaper or matches. Throwing away corn cobs was wasteful when they could make stock, feed animals, or fuel fires. Mothers who threw away corn cobs were considered ignorant of their many uses. The tradition of using corn cobs came from Native American and pioneer families who taught settlers to use every part of the corn plant because corn was sacred and wasting any part of it was disrespectful. By the 1950s, using corn cobs had become standard practice in rural households and farming communities where nothing was wasted and everything had a purpose. Kids learned to strip corn cobs clean and save them in a bowl for stock or animal feed. Some mothers dried corn cobs and used them as scrubbing brushes for cleaning pots and cast-iron skillets because the rough texture removed stuck-on food without scratching the surface. Some mothers used dried corn cobs as kindling for starting fires in fireplaces and wood stoves. Some mothers ground dried corn cobs into coarse meal and used it as animal feed or compost. Today, we throw corn cobs into the garbage or compost without thinking. Back then, corn cobs were stock, animal feed, fire starter, and scrubbing brush all rolled into one, and throwing them away meant wasting a resource that had multiple uses and cost nothing. 25 scraps down. Everyone saved and reused by clever 1950s mothers. Pickle juice tenderized meat. Watermelon rinds became candy. Apple scraps became jelly. Beet greens became side dishes. Corn cobs became stock. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was thrown away. Today, we toss these scraps. Chicken feet never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers saved them for making collagen-rich broth that healed sick children, soothed aching joints, and made soup thick and gelatinous without adding flour or cornstarch. When buying a whole chicken from the butcher, the feet often came attached or could be requested for free because most Americans refused to buy them, and butchers had to throw them away. Chicken feet cleaned by blanching them in boiling water for 1 minute, then peeling off the outer yellow skin to reveal clean white skin underneath. The cleaned feet went into a pot with chicken bones, water, onion, carrots, celery, vinegar, salt, and pepper, and simmered for 12 to 24 hours. The long simmer pulled collagen, gelatin, and minerals from the feet and turned the water into thick, gelatinous broth that jiggled when cold. That broth became the base for chicken soup, wonton soup, or Vietnamese pho. Chicken feet broth also healed colds, reduced inflammation, improved skin and hair health, and helped broken bones heal faster because of the high collagen content. Mothers who knew the healing power of chicken feet never threw them away. Asian, Southern, and Eastern European grandmothers taught their daughters to save chicken feet because their own mothers and grandmothers had used them for centuries as medicine and food. Chinese grandmothers made chicken feet soup with ginger and scallions. Southern grandmothers added chicken feet to chicken and dumplings for extra richness. Jewish grandmothers added chicken feet to chicken soup to make it cure colds faster. By the 1950s, saving chicken feet had become standard practice in immigrant and budget-conscious households where mothers knew that chicken feet were too valuable to throw away. Kids who saw chicken feet in the pot made faces and refused to look, but they ate the soup without complaint because it tasted delicious and made them feel better when they were sick. Mothers who threw away chicken feet were considered wasteful and ignorant of their healing properties. Some butchers charged 5 cents per pound for chicken feet. Some butchers gave them away for free. Most American families refused to buy them because they looked strange and reminded people of poverty and hard times. Today, chicken feet are sold at Asian markets and specialty butchers for premium prices because collagen broth has become trendy and expensive. Back then, chicken feet were free medicine that healed families without doctor visits or pharmacy bills, and throwing them away. Leftover gravy never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers reheated it and poured it over biscuits, mashed potatoes, toast, or rice to turn leftovers into a new meal. After Sunday dinner with roast chicken, pot roast, or fried chicken, the leftover gravy scraped from the serving bowl into a jar and stored in the refrigerator. The next morning, the gravy reheated in a small pot on the stove and poured over warm biscuits for breakfast. The combination of hot gravy and buttery biscuits filled hungry stomachs and used up leftovers without cooking a new meal from scratch. Leftover gravy also got stirred into leftover mashed potatoes to make them creamy and flavorful again. Leftover gravy poured over slices of toasted bread became creamed gravy on toast, a Depression-era breakfast that poor families ate when there was nothing else in the house. Leftover gravy mixed with shredded leftover meat became the filling for pot pies or casseroles. Leftover gravy thinned with broth or milk became soup. Throwing away leftover gravy was wasteful when it could be reheated and served 3 different ways. Mothers who threw away gravy were considered lazy and careless because gravy took time to make and contained precious pan drippings and flour that cost money. Kids who complained about eating gravy for breakfast got lectured about starving children and told to clean their plates or go to school hungry. Some mothers froze leftover gravy in jars and saved it for making quick meals later in the month when the grocery budget ran out. Some mothers stirred leftover gravy into soups and stews to add richness and flavor. Some mothers used leftover gravy as the base for new gravy by adding more flour, milk, and pan drippings from the next meal. The tradition of saving gravy came from Depression-era grandmothers who learned to waste nothing and reuse everything because food was scarce and money was tight. Lemon peels never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers used them for cleaning, baking, making lemon extract, or freshening the garbage disposal and refrigerator. After squeezing lemons for lemonade, lemon pie, or lemon chicken, the peels saved and used within a day or 2. Lemon peels rubbed on cutting boards, countertops, and sinks removed stains and killed bacteria without using harsh chemical cleaners. The natural citric acid in the peels cut through grease and left surfaces smelling fresh and clean. Lemon peels dropped into the garbage disposal and ground up with cold water freshened the drain and removed bad odors. Lemon peels placed in a bowl in the refrigerator absorbed food smells and kept the icebox smelling fresh. Lemon peels grated into fine zest and stored in a jar added lemon flavor to cakes, cookies, and frostings without wasting the whole lemon. Some mothers candied lemon peels by simmering them in sugar syrup until translucent, then rolling them in granulated sugar and drying them on a rack. The candied peels eaten as candy or chopped and added to fruitcake. Some mothers soaked lemon peels in vodka or grain alcohol for 2 weeks to make homemade lemon extract that cost pennies compared to store-bought extract. Throwing away lemon peels was wasteful when they could clean, freshen, flavor, and sweeten for free. Mothers who threw away lemon peels were considered ignorant of their many uses. The tradition of using lemon peels came from European and Mediterranean grandmothers who grew up in countries where lemons grew abundantly and every part of the fruit was used because wasting food was unthinkable. Broken cookies and cake scraps never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers saved them in a jar and used them for pie crusts, icebox cakes, trifles, or dessert toppings. When cookies broke during baking or storage, the broken pieces went into a jar on the counter labeled crumbs instead of being thrown away or eaten immediately. When cake layers cracked or edges got trimmed off to make the cake look neat, the scraps went into the crumbs jar. When the jar filled up, mothers crushed the contents into fine crumbs with a rolling pin and mixed the crumbs with melted butter to make no-bake pie crusts for cream pies, cheesecakes, or icebox pies. The crust pressed into a pie pan and chilled until firm, then filled with pudding, whipped cream, or cream cheese filling. Broken cookies and cake scraps also got layered with whipped cream or pudding in a glass bowl to make trifle that looked fancy and tasted delicious. Some mothers layered cookie crumbs and whipped cream in a loaf pan, froze it overnight, and sliced it into icebox cake. Some mothers sprinkled cookie and cake crumbs on top of ice cream, pudding, or fruit salad as a crunchy topping. Throwing away broken cookies and cake scraps was wasteful when they could be transformed into new desserts that cost nothing extra. Mothers who threw away broken cookies were considered careless and wasteful. Kids who broke cookies on purpose got scolded, but the crumbs still went into the jar. Some mothers used cookie and cake crumbs to coat truffles or candy balls. Some mothers mixed crumbs into brownie batter to make the brownies extra rich and fudgy. Some mothers stirred crumbs into pancake batter to make dessert pancakes. The tradition of saving crumbs came from Depression-era grandmothers who learned to waste nothing and turn scraps into something beautiful and delicious. By the 1950s, keeping a crumbs jar had become standard practice in households where mothers knew that broken cookies and cake scraps were ingredients, not garbage. Today, we eat broken cookies straight from the package or throw them away when they get stale. Back then, broken cookies and cake scraps were dessert ingredients waiting to be transformed into pie crust, trifle, or icebox cake. And throwing them away meant wasting an opportunity to make something special without spending money on new ingredients. Glass jars and containers never got thrown away in the 1950s because mothers washed them, saved them, and reused them for storing leftovers, canning vegetables, organizing pantry staples, and holding small household items for years without ever buying storage containers from the store. Every jelly jar, pickle jar, mayonnaise jar, baby food jar, and jam jar got rinsed thoroughly with hot soapy water, dried, and stacked in the cupboard or under the sink. Jars with metal lids that still sealed tight became leftover containers for soup, gravy, cooked vegetables, and sauces stored in the refrigerator. Wide-mouth jars with good seals became canning jars for tomatoes, green beans, peaches, pickles, and jam during harvest season when mothers preserved the summer garden for winter eating. Small jars with tight lids held buttons, rubber bands, paper clips, safety pins, and sewing supplies in the sewing basket. Medium jars held flour, sugar, rice, beans, oatmeal, and pasta in the pantry where they kept food fresh and protected it from bugs and moisture. Large jars held wooden spoons, spatulas, and kitchen utensils on the counter. Empty jars also became drinking glasses, flower vases, pencil holders, coin banks, and craft supply organizers. Throwing away glass jars was wasteful and foolish when they could be reused forever and replaced expensive store-bought storage containers that cost money. Mothers who threw away glass jars were considered careless and lazy. Kids learned to rinse jars and remove labels by soaking them in hot water and scrubbing them with steel wool. Some mothers decorated jars with fabric, ribbon, or paint and gave them as gifts filled with homemade jam, pickles, or cookies. Some mothers used jars as candle holders by placing tea lights or votive candles inside. Some mothers used jars as planters for herbs, flowers, or seedlings on the kitchen windowsill. The tradition of saving glass jars came from Depression-era grandmothers who grew up when glass was valuable and throwing away anything reusable was wasteful and sinful. By the 1950s, saving jars had become automatic for mothers who learned from their own mothers to wash, dry, and stack jars in the cupboard without questioning why. Cupboards filled with mismatched jars of every size and shape and nobody cared that they didn't match because they worked perfectly and cost nothing. These 30 kitchen scraps prove that our grandmothers weren't just frugal. They were brilliant, resourceful, and deeply connected to the value of food in ways we've completely forgotten. They saved chicken bones and turned them into healing broth. They fried potato peels into crispy snacks. They washed glass jars and reused them forever. They pickled watermelon rinds and turned them into candy. They boiled corn cobs into sweet stock. They saved coffee grounds and fed their gardens. We buy expensive storage containers, cleaning supplies, and garden fertilizer at the store while throwing away the free versions our grandmothers used every single day. We complain about grocery prices while wasting half of what we buy. Our grandmothers would be ashamed. The difference wasn't the food, it was the gratitude. They understood that food was precious, money was scarce, and wasting anything useful was foolish and sinful. They taught their children to save scraps, reuse jars, and turn leftovers into new meals because survival depended on it. Those lessons kept families fed through the Depression, World War II, and decades of poverty that most of us will never experience or understand. Which of these 30 scraps did your grandmother save? Drop the number in the comments and tell us what she did with it.